A very important story today. Britain's spy chief, Keir Giles, he's the head of the MI5, has given a speech. It's kind of strange, I think, MI5 guys giving speeches, the publicity-seeking spy chief. But he's given a speech saying that the security services face one hell of a job. Because Russia, in particular, Iran as well, are really stepping up their attempts to destabilise this country, encouraging crime, trying to corrupt electoral candidates, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So in the studio, very kind of him to come in to discuss this, senior fellow at Chatham House and also the author of Moscow Rules, What Drives Russia to Confront the West. Is Keir McCallum right, Keir? Sorry, I didn't say your name. Did I say your name? Keir. I think I was distracted by the fact it's Keir.
It's another Keir. I've had to get used to it over the last few months. So, yeah.
I think you should deed poll, I think is what you need. Keir Giles is here. Is Keir McCallum right? Are we facing an unprecedented problem here?
Well, there's no doubt that they're trying. And this is something that we've been watching right across Europe as peaking in the last few months. In fact, it's a little strange that he talks now about the campaign to wage sustained mayhem on British European streets. Some people might think, well, what on earth is he talking about? Because we can't see it. If you look at this pattern of attacks that all the way across Europe, we have only seen one that's actually been publicised in the UK. And overall, in the grand scheme of things, they're pinpricks. So what I think he's alluding to there is there's a great deal more going on below the surface. There's a lot happening that we are not hearing about because it's not being publicised, because there are ongoing investigations, because they are plots that are being intercepted before they actually come to fruition. But that's not the same in Europe. And all the way across that central band of Europe, Russia's been carrying out attacks against logistics, against shopping centres. They've been reconnoitring power supplies, emergency preparedness. It looks like either preparations for conflict or, as Keir McCallum is saying here, just sowing mayhem. Not so long ago, we had the real spy chief, the head of the Secret Intelligence Service, saying that the Russian intelligence services had gone a bit feral, in his words, just causing so much damage across the place.
Yeah, we're told that Iran also, Russia obviously is a big player in this, but Iran too has been responsible for, and I quote, this is Mr. McCallum talking, plot after plot at unprecedented pace and scale. These threats that they pose include planting internet hatred, disinformation, blackmailing election candidates, intimidation of communities, and sort of fanning the flames of public disorder, as they are thought to have done in the Southport riots and the subsequent riots. So why, Keir, now? Why have these threats reached an unprecedented level? What's going on in the mind of Putin and indeed the Ayatollah?
Well, first of all, on the Russia-Iran nexus, if you like, what we've got is a problem of everybody looking over each other's shoulder, realising what works and realising that they can carry out these campaigns. You've not only got Russia looking at what Iran has done, recruiting Hell's Angels in the United States to carry out attacks and thinking, well, yes, we'll get proxies from organised crime as well to do our dirty work for them in Britain and Europe. You've got China looking at what Russia is doing in terms of its intimidation of the frontline states and trying that out against Taiwan. So we're really facing an alliance of all of these different countries that have decided between themselves that the time is right to step up the pressure. Now, there are a number of different ways you can interpret that.
Why is the time right now, then?
Well, one possible answer to that, and this is the worst case scenario, is if you look at the pattern of some of the attacks, particularly in Europe, they look exactly like a checklist that we put together 4 years ago of what Russia would do in advance of a conventional attack on a NATO state. It's looking at logistics, it's looking at moving troops from A to B, it's looking at emergency preparedness of countries. We looked at what they could do without actually firing the first missile to immobilize Europe, and we're seeing a lot of that now.
So this could be a prelude to traditional conflict between Russia and NATO.
Could be. That's a big could. Now, at the other end of the scale, this could be simply Russia looking to impose costs and damage and consequences because it's what they've traditionally done. 2 years ago already now, I wrote a book called Russia's War on Everybody, which is how about these campaigns do affect ordinary people that have no interest in Russia, not just here, not just in Europe, but actually around the world. So they have the opportunity to do this by reaching out into these criminal networks, disaffected individuals, people who want to attack their own countries, and they think, well, why not?
I suppose that social media, the wonderful world of the internet, has completely changed the global picture when it comes to this kind of activity.
If you look at the way they are now recruiting people, it is very blunt, very unsophisticated, at least the plots that have come to light. They're just reaching out to people across Telegram and saying, will you do a job for us? Now, of course, a lot of that is going to fail. A lot of that is going to be detected and intercepted by the security services. But the beauty of this is for Russia and Iran, they don't need a very high success rate. They only need to recruit 1 in 100 people they approach. They only need 1 in 100 of those to carry out a successful attack because there's no downside for them. They've no reputation to lose. There's going to be no comeback to Russia itself that we can see, so they'll continue doing it.
Mr. McCallum revealed that the MI5 and the police here have disrupted 43 serious attack plots since March 2017. Do we retaliate? Do we try and disrupt Russia and Iran? Do we get involved in this kind of activity?
If we do, it's not very visible, but it's interesting, the number and the words there. 43 serious attack plots. 43 doesn't sound like a lot, but how serious is serious? Is this counting the attacks like, for example, the one that's received all the publicity here in the UK, which is just an arson attack against effectively a shed, a small warehouse in East London. That's the only documented incident so far. Does it count as serious? It wouldn't seem so. In terms of retaliation, one of the reasons why Russia is doing this by reaching out to proxies, to criminals, is because of the retaliation that's already happened. Their intelligence officers were cleared out from across Europe in the wake of the attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal here in the UK. Masses of them were exposed. More of them were neutralized as the result of the efforts of the media, identifying who these people were. They can't use them as networks anymore. So you no longer have the murder gangs of Russian-serving military officers that were roaming Europe in the last decade. So they've got to go for other ways of delivering these effects against us.
I mean, I kind of listed, some of the threats that we're talking about here. As I say, planting internet hatred, disinformation, blackmailing election candidates. We've seen all this in the papers over the past few months. Intimidation of communities and public disorder. Anything I've missed out there? I mean, mayhem is a very general word, a generic word. What else might mayhem mean in these circumstances?
Well, the point about your list there that came from this reporting from Ken McCallum's comments is that's all about information. It's all about how Russia sows fear, uncertainty and doubt and tries to influence political processes, and Iran as well. What it leaves out is all of the physical attacks that we've been seeing and all of the preparations for physical attacks. Just to give a simple example, Finland, next to Russia, they've been seeing attacks and investigation of their water treatment and distribution facilities, very obvious, blatant incursions into the system that actually provides drinking water to people. Is it intimidation? Is it preparation for an actual real attack poisoning hundreds of thousands of people? Impossible to tell. But that's the characteristics of these campaigns that have actually involved real people going and doing real things. And it's been highly destructive across Europe.
Now, you will have noticed, most people have, it's quite tense in the Middle East. We're waiting for Israel's retaliation against Iran after that missile attack last week. After that happens, I mean, would you expect there to be terrorist activity around Western Europe, but particularly Britain?
Well, there are a number of different ways that could happen, and none of them is good. Another point that Ken McCallum made was that, yes, we should expect a stepping up of terrorist activity off the back of what's happening in the Middle East. But in addition to that, one of the things that we've been expecting for a long time, but hasn't yet happened as far as we know, is Russia resuming its old practice of sponsoring and facilitating organized terror groups to carry out mass casualty attacks in European capitals. It's an anomaly that they haven't been doing that in the last few years, but if this trend, if this direction of travel of escalating carries on, we'd expect to see that fairly soon.
Let's go back to that point you made about the possible, must stress this is just possible, but the possible prelude to conflict between Russia and NATO, a NATO state or NATO generally, and you said that some of the mayhem techniques that we've been seeing lately might indicate that process is underway. I mean, really?
There's a number of reasons why people say, really, exactly like that. And one of the first things people say is, well, how can Russia possibly mount an attack beyond Ukraine? They've run into a quagmire there. They're making no progress. They're losing hundreds of thousands of casualties. But there are two distinct things that have been happening this year that make it far less of a remote possibility. First, the way that Russia's been rebuilding its military. It now has a bigger army in Ukraine than when it started this war. It's less well-equipped, it's less well-trained, but they're quite content to send forward hundreds of bodies to soak up the enemy bullets.
It's the Russian technique, isn't it?
It is the Russian technique.
Kill us in our thousands and we'll carry on coming. Yeah.
Exactly. Plus, the Air Force and the Navy has been barely scratched. Russia's nuclear weapons haven't come into play except as a weapon for intimidating the United States. So they are, according to the consensus among the defense chiefs, the defense intelligence chiefs that we hear, preparing for an attack against NATO. Where the disagreement is when it will come. You hear timescales like 3 to 5 years. Meanwhile, you've also got the United States that is distracted, and Europe is just one of the things on the US's radar in terms of protection. It's also looking to China, to the Middle East. You've got the different elements of the United States military competing for attention and resources, and Europe is losing out, and that's even without the arrival of a Trump presidency.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Trump. There was a story, I can't remember, he's said to have had, is it 6 phone calls with Putin since he lost the last election. Did you believe, as he states, that if I'm president, Putin will be less of a threat to the world?
No, it's the opposite. If Trump is president, Putin will get his way in all kinds of ways, not just in Ukraine, but will be in trouble immediately as well. There is absolutely no doubt, if you look closely at what Russia has wanted from the world and the United States over the last 50 years and map that against what Trump has done in office and is attempting to do again if re-elected, they are precisely the same. There's no doubt in my industry that Trump favors Russian national security interests over American ones.
And do you think Putin runs rings around him?
I don't think he even has to. For whatever reason, Trump is quite content to do his bidding.
Interesting. I mean, what next? What do you think's going to happen in the Middle East next? I mean,
well, unfortunately, it may not even be the Middle East that is the biggest problem for us. The book that I have coming out at the end of this month, and the fact that it's already published indicates how long this has been going on, is called Who Will Defend Europe? And it is precisely about that danger that the US becoming less interested in the defense of Europe and Russia rebuilding its capabilities might mean we have a threat much closer to home. And of course, if it is one of the frontline states that is a NATO member, that's the UK directly involved immediately because of treaty commitments under NATO.
Everything you're saying indicates to me that, what's that expression, 5 minutes to midnight, 30 seconds to midnight. I mean, the world has never been in a more precarious state since World War II, has it?
Well, you can measure that by different metrics. You might say that at certain points during the Cold War we were closer to mass annihilation, but certainly the number of different problems simultaneously is pretty scary at the moment, yes.
Oh dear, dear oh me. I'm depressed now. So one last question, Keir. How can the audience, how can the public stay vigilant under these tense circumstances?
Well, you mentioned right at the very beginning that it was strange that Ken McCallum in a secretive agency was now being public about this. Yeah. I think probably one of the objectives of that is just to raise public awareness, to make sure that people do know about this. Now, you and I are old enough to remember just about the Cold War and how people were alert. We remember terrorist campaigns against London and people were alert. And that is a key ingredient to societies being more resilient against this. Simply being aware of the threat is a major part of being able to counter it. And I suspect we'll see more efforts trying to get people alert to the fact that this is going on because people need to know what's happening. At the same time, of course, not raising the alarm too much because so far that mayhem has not actually started. Whether it's because of the successful efforts of the security service and the police to intercept them, or whether because this is just gearing up, we're not in that situation yet, but it's as well to be ready for it when we are.
I guess this is my last question. By the way, I remember when I was a kid, we used to do nuclear lessons. We used to get underneath the desk as if that was going to save us. But last question, Putin. How much do we have to worry about him? Is he sane? Is he sentient? And will he stop at global annihilation, nuclear annihilation?
And the problem is Putin is sane and sentient and perfectly logical, but it's the information that's fed to him for him to make those logical decisions. And the real danger is that just like in February 2022, when he launched this invasion of Ukraine, based on a completely wildly misguided understanding of what Ukraine was and what his armed forces were, he might have the same wrong information and launch an attack against a NATO country in the future simply because he doesn't understand what's happening outside his bunker.
Well, that's something to look forward to, isn't it? Keir,
yes.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Keir Giles there, Senior Fellow at Chatham House and author of Moscow Rules, What Drives Russia to Confront the West. Is that your latest book, or is there a new one?
No, there have been a couple since then.
Which
the next
is the one we could get right now?
24th of October, Who Will Defend Europe? That's the most urgent one at the moment.
OK, we'll come in and talk about that when it comes out. Excellent stuff.